July 9, 1943, 22:43 hours. High above the Mediterranean, 2,700 paratroopers of the American 82nd Airborne and the British 1st Airborne Division sit strapped into freezing transport planes. Their faces are blackened with burnt cork, their stomachs churn from seasickness and fear. Below them, the blacked-out island of Sicily glitters, only with the occasional flash of an Italian coastal battery. No one on the ground knows what is coming. No one in Rome imagines that in less than 3 weeks Benito Mussolini, the man who once made the trains run on time, will be a prisoner in his own country. Tonight the first domino falls. This is the story of Operation Husky, the largest amphibious invasion in history up to that point, the moment the Allies finally took the fight to fortress Europe, and the beginning of the end for fascist Italy. It is easy, 80 years later, to see Sicily as a sideshow, a stepping stone before the real invasion of Italy at Salerno and Anzio. But in the summer of 1943, nothing felt like a sideshow. Stalingrad had only just ended. The U-boats had finally been beaten in the Atlantic. The Red Army was preparing to push west. In a smoky conference room in Casablanca the previous January, Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill had looked at the map and agreed the time had come to strike the soft underbelly of the Axis. Churchill called Sicily the key that unlocks the door to Europe. Roosevelt simply wanted American troops in combat against Germans before the year was out. Both men knew that if the invasion failed, the entire coalition could fracture. So they planned the biggest operation yet: 226,000 Allied soldiers, 4,000 aircraft, 3,300 ships and landing craft, 600 tanks, 14,000 vehicles, 1,800 guns. Facing them, 230,000 Italian coastal troops, poorly equipped, poorly fed and deeply unenthusiastic, plus 2 rebuilt German divisions, the battle-hardened Hermann Göring Panzer Division and the 15th Panzergrenadier Division, veterans of North Africa. On paper, the odds looked good for the Allies. On the ground, nothing ever goes according to paper. Gela, Southern Sicily, 0230, July 10, 1943. Private First Class John O'Rourke of the 45th Thunderbird Division clings to the ramp of a Higgins boat as it pitches in 12-foot swells. The sea is so rough that many men have already vomited over their rifles. A naval lieutenant shouts 30 seconds, then the ramp drops. Cold water explodes over them. O'Rourke wades ashore under red tracer fire, the sand sucking at his boots, the air filled with the whistle of bullets and the screams of the wounded. Behind him, landing craft capsize. Ahead, Italian pillboxes open fire with machine guns that sound like tearing canvas. By dawn, 150,000 Allied troops are ashore along a 100-mile front from Licata in the west to Syracuse in the east. The British 8th Army under Bernard Montgomery lands, almost unopposed, near Pacino and Syracuse. The brand-new American 7th Army under George Patton hits the beaches around Gela and Scaglietti with far bloodier results. But the real gamble is happening in the air. Winds of nearly 40 miles an hour scatter the parachute drops across 50 miles of countryside. Some British gliders crash into the sea. Men drown under their equipment. American paratroopers land in olive groves, vineyards, and Italian farmyards, miles from their drop zones. One company lands directly on top of an Italian artillery battery and captures it before the gunners can fire a shot. By morning, the airborne forces are so fragmented that no one knows where anyone is. And yet their very chaos terrifies the Italians. Rumors sweep the island. The Americans have landed 20,000 paratroopers behind every beach. Italian coastal divisions begin surrendering en masse to handfuls of mud-stained GIs who can barely speak a word of Italian. In Piazza Armerina, an Italian colonel in a perfectly pressed uniform walks up to a dusty American lieutenant with 15 paratroopers and formally surrenders his entire 2,000-man regiment. The lieutenant, who has no idea what to do with 2,000 prisoners, simply tells the colonel to stack their rifles and wait for someone to collect them. The colonel salutes, clicks his heels, and obeys. Meanwhile at sea, the Italian navy stays in port. Mussolini had forbidden the fleet from risking battle. The Italian Air Force barely contests the skies. By the end of the first day, the Allies own the air and the sea. But the Germans are a different story. On the morning of July 11th, the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, supported by Tiger tanks, launches a furious counterattack against the American beachhead at Gela. Sherman tanks duel 80-ton Tigers at point-blank range in burning wheat fields. Navy destroyers steam in so close to shore they scrape bottom, firing 5-inch salvos over open sights into German columns. At the height of the battle, General Patton himself wades ashore, cigar clenched in teeth, ivory-handled revolvers on his hips, shouting at troops to move forward. A naval shell screams overhead and explodes behind him. Patton never flinches. A war correspondent watching him writes that he looked like he was enjoying himself immensely. By nightfall, the German counterattack is broken. The beachhead holds. But the real shock is happening 600 miles away in Rome. Benito Mussolini sits in his vast office staring at situation reports that grow worse by the hour. He has not slept in 2 days. His hands tremble as he reads that Syracuse has fallen in less than 24 hours. His phone calls to Berlin go unanswered. Hitler is preoccupied with the Kursk offensive. On July 13th, Mussolini writes a desperate letter to Hitler begging for reinforcements. Hitler's reply is brutal. You have lost North Africa. You are now losing your own soil. Defend it or Italy will be treated as occupied territory. The king, Victor Emmanuel III, a small silent man who has spent 20 years pretending to be deaf while Mussolini shouted, finally begins to listen to the whispers of generals and courtiers. They tell him the war is lost. They tell him the people are starving. They tell him the Americans are coming. Sicily has not yet fallen. Messina and Mount Etna still bristle with German guns, but the heart of fascism has already stopped beating. And somewhere in the dark corridors of power, Adolf Hitler reads the news and realizes for the first time that his closest ally has betrayed him. August 1st, 1943. Mount Etna towers black against a white-hot Sicilian sky. For 3 weeks, the men of the German 15th Panzergrenadier Division and the Hermann Göring Division have been using this mountain as a natural fortress to bleed the Allies dry. Every road that climbs toward Catania and Messina winds through narrow passes, stone villages, and fields of prickly pear that hide machine gun nests. The British 8th Army has been slamming its head against this wall for 18 days. Montgomery has become frustrated, almost angry. Patton smells opportunity. On July 31st, Patton receives permission, grudgingly, to launch a series of amphibious end runs up the northern coast toward Messina. He turns to his chief of staff and says the words that will become legend. If we get to Messina first, the son of a bitch will never forgive me. What follows is one of the most audacious pursuits in military history. August 3rd and 4th, the 3rd Infantry Division lands at Sant'Agata di Melitolo, 40 miles behind German lines. August 8th, the 45th Division hops to Barcelona. August 11th, American troops land again right on the coastal highway at Brolo. Each time the Germans are forced to abandon vehicles, guns, and wounded to avoid being trapped. German soldiers begin calling it the devil behind us. By August 10th, the noose is tightening. The British have finally broken through the Etna line after savage fighting. The Americans are racing along the North Coast Road, sometimes covering 25 miles in a day against rearguard actions that last only minutes. Patton himself drives forward in a jeep, pistol on his hip, shouting at traffic jams, "Get those vehicles moving or I'll shoot the drivers myself." On August 16th, elements of the 3rd Infantry Division enter the smoking ruins of Messina at 10:15 in the morning. A patrol from the British 4th Armoured Brigade arrives from the south at almost exactly the same moment. The two armies meet in the shattered piazza in front of the cathedral. A British captain offers an American lieutenant a cigarette. The American produces a bottle of captured Italian cognac. They drink together while German shells still fall on the harbor. Sicily is ours, 38 days from the first landing to the last shot. Allied casualties 22,000, Axis casualties and prisoners over 165,000, mostly Italian. The Germans evacuate nearly 40,000 troops, almost 10,000 vehicles and 47 tanks across the Strait of Messina under the noses of Allied air forces and navies. It is a tactical masterpiece of withdrawal. Hitler later calls it a second Dunkirk. But strategically, the Germans have lost everything: airfields, ports, an entire army group in prisoners, and most importantly, Italy itself. While the battle rages in Sicily, the corpse of fascism is already rotting in the Roman sun. Mussolini sits under house arrest, first in a barracks, then quietly moved to the island of Ponza, then to La Madonna, and finally to the Gran Sasso Hotel high in the Apennines. He writes pathetic letters to his mistress: "I am treated well, but I am a prisoner. The king has betrayed me." The new government under Marshal Pietro Badoglio begins secret armistice talks with the Allies in Lisbon. Publicly, Badoglio proclaims that the war continues at the side of our Germanic allies. Privately, he tells his generals, "We must get out of this war before the Germans occupy the entire country." In Berlin, Hitler rages. He orders Otto Skorzeny to prepare a rescue mission. On September 3, 1943, exactly 4 years after Britain declared war, the new Italian government signs an unconditional surrender in a tent at Cassabile, Sicily. The armistice is kept secret for 5 more days. September 8, 1942 hours, General Eisenhower broadcasts the news from Algiers. At almost the same moment, Marshal Badoglio reads a short statement on Italian radio. The Italian government has requested an armistice. All fighting against Anglo-American forces must cease. Chaos erupts. Italian soldiers throw down their rifles and start walking home. German troops move with lightning speed to disarm their former allies. In Rome, the king and Badoglio flee south in a convoy of staff cars, abandoning the city to its fate. The Italian army, 1,700,000 men, simply dissolves overnight. One more act remains in the tragedy of Benito Mussolini. September 12, 1943. At noon, 12 German gliders swoop silently onto the rocky plateau of Gran Sasso. SS Captain Otto Skorzeny storms the hotel where Mussolini is held. Italian guards, under orders not to fire on Germans, simply step aside. Skorzeny finds Mussolini in a small room, unshaven, wrapped in a grey overcoat. He clicks his heels and announces, "Duce, the Führer has sent me to free you." Mussolini, eyes wet, embraces him. Within minutes, he is bundled into a tiny Fieseler Storch plane. The pilot takes off down a 100-yard strip of grass that ends in a 3,000-foot drop. The plane clears the edge by inches. Mussolini is free, but only to become the puppet ruler of a German-controlled rump state in northern Italy, the Republic of Salo. Sicily started it all. A single campaign, 38 days of heat, dust, and blood, toppled a 21-year dictatorship, split the Axis in two, and opened the road to Rome. But the price is only beginning to be paid. The real invasion of Italy lies ahead, and it will be infinitely worse. September 12, 1943. As Mussolini's little plane flies north, the people of Sicily wake to their first morning without fascism in 21 years. In villages that have not seen a priest in uniform for a decade, the tricolour flies again beside the stars and stripes and the Union Jack. Old men weep openly in the streets. Children chase jeeps for candy. Farmers are already ploughing around unexploded bombs and the bones of the dead. The war has moved on, but Sicily has not recovered and never really will. Allied military government officers find a society that has been hollowed out. No police, no courts, no food distribution, no electricity. Black market prices for bread are 20 times pre-war levels. The mafia, released from Mussolini's prisons in July, steps gracefully into the vacuum. The Allies need the mafia to keep the docks working and the peasants calm, so they look the other way. A handshake in a lemon grove becomes the founding moment of the post-war Sicilian underworld. By autumn, the temporary cemeteries are full. Row after row of white crosses stretch across the yellow grass near Gela, Licata and Pont Grand. American dead 2,237, British and Canadian over 2,700, Italian perhaps 4,700 soldiers and tens of thousands of civilians. German dead 4,561 officially, many more burned inside their tanks or buried where they fell. The sea still gives up bodies months later. A British glider pilot tangled in his harness, an Italian sailor washed ashore near Syracuse, a young German panzer grenadier found by fishermen with his paybook still in his pocket. They bury them where they find them, sometimes side by side, enemies who died within sight of each other. Sicily taught the Allies lessons they could not have learned anywhere else. They learned that amphibious warfare on this scale was possible, but only just. They learned that airborne troops scattered over half a country could still cause chaos out of all proportion to their numbers. They learned that German soldiers would fight with skill and ferocity even when defeat was certain. And they learned that coalition warfare between proud allies is a delicate, dangerous dance. Sicily proved that the Axis was not unbreakable. One sharp blow at the weakest link, Italy, shattered 20 years of fascist rule in less than 3 weeks. It gave Stalin proof that the Western Allies were finally fighting in earnest. It gave Churchill the Mediterranean strategy he had dreamed of. And it gave the Italian people a glimpse of life without Il Duce, however chaotic and painful that life would become. June 4, 1944. 11 months after the first parachute landed near Gela, American soldiers of the 88th Infantry Division march up the Via Veneto in Rome. Roman crowds cheer themselves hoarse. An old woman runs alongside a jeep holding up a faded photograph of her missing son, an artilleryman who disappeared on the Catania plain. The GI takes the photo, tucks it into his breast pocket and promises nothing. In the distance, church bells ring for the first liberation of a European capital. And somewhere high in the Alps, in a lakeside villa guarded by SS sentries, Benito Mussolini listens to the BBC on a hidden radio. He hears the cheers in Rome. He turns to his mistress Clara Petacci and says, almost wonderingly, "They are cheering for my death." He is not wrong. 10 months later, on April 28, 1945, Italian partisans will drag him from a truck near Lake Como, shoot him beside a garden wall, and hang his body upside down from a girder in Milan's Piazzale Loreto. The corpse will be spat on, kicked, and urinated on by a crowd that once cheered his name. Sicily began that ending. A single campaign, 38 days in the merciless summer of 1943, destroyed a dictatorship, opened the door to Fortress Europe, and reminded the world that even the longest night eventually sees dawn. The cost was high. The lesson was priceless.